She decided to claim me right there at the dinner table, sliding her velvet-clad foot up the inside of my leg exactly when my father raised his crystal glass to toast. Eternal friendship. And I will never forget the way her dark eyes locked onto mine, promising a destruction I was too weak to resist. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity amidst the domestic blur of a Saturday night roast. I was 24, fresh out of grad school and drowning in the uncertainty of my future, sitting at my parents' mahogany dining table like a dutiful son. Across from me sat Veronica, my mother's best friend since college, a woman I had known my entire life as Aunt V. But the woman sitting there tonight wasn't an aunt. She was 42, recently divorced, and radiating a kind of dangerous, liberated energy that made the air in the room feel thin. She wore a dress the color of spilled Merlot that clung to her like a second skin, a stark contrast to my mother's sensible floral blouse. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and expensive wax candles, but all I could focus on was the slow, rhythmic pressure of her high heel moving higher up my calf, hidden by the heavy linen tablecloth. Every time my mother laughed or my father made a bad joke, Veronica would press harder, a silent, secret challenge that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to focus on cutting my meat, but my hands were shaking. She knew it. She took a sip of her wine, the rim of the glass stained with her dark lipstick, and smiled, not a friendly smile, but a predator's grin. The tension under the table was becoming unbearable. I was sweating in my button-down shirt, terrified that my father would drop his napkin and see the violation of boundaries happening inches from his knees. I tried to pull my leg away, to retreat, but Veronica was relentless. She hooked her heel around my ankle, dragging me back, trapping me. "So, Alex," she purred, her voice smooth and rich, cutting through the clatter of silverware. "Your mother tells me you're taking a gap year. Trying to find yourself?" The way she said, "find yourself," made it sound like a dirty secret. My mother beamed, oblivious. "He's just weighing his options, aren't you, sweetie?" I opened my mouth to answer, to say something safe and neutral, but Veronica chose that exact moment to shift her foot higher, pressing firmly against the inseam of my trousers. I gasped, dropping my fork. It hit the china plate with a loud clatter that silenced the table. I'm just looking for the right fit," I stammered, my face burning. Veronica's eyes danced with amusement. "Fit is very important," she agreed, her voice dripping with double meaning. "You don't want to rush into something that feels tight." Then, she escalated the game. She reached for the bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon to refill her glass. Her movements were usually graceful, elegant, but as she tipped the bottle, her eyes never left mine. Her hand slipped. It was a calculated, precise accident. The bottle jerked, and a dark red wave of wine cascaded over the rim of her glass, splashing across the table and pouring directly into my lap. The cold liquid soaked through my trousers instantly, shocking me, while the dark stain spread aggressively across my crotch. "Oh my God!" my mother shrieked, jumping up and grabbing a handful of napkins. "Alex, your new slacks!" my father groaned. "Great, there goes the carpet!" Chaos erupted. My mother was reaching for me with the napkins, about to start dabbing at my lap, which would have been mortifying. I pushed my chair back, desperate to hide the physical reaction Veronica's earlier teasing had already caused, now masked by the wine. "Stop, Karen," Veronica said, her voice commanding and calm. She stood up, imposing and beautiful in the candlelight, intercepting my mother's frantic hands. She placed a hand on my mother's shoulder, gently pushing her back into her seat. "Sit down. You'll just smear it. It's my fault. I'm clumsy tonight." She looked at me, and the playful mask was gone, replaced by an intense, serious purpose. "I have a professional stain remover in my travel kit upstairs. It works on silk. It will work on this." She walked around the table and grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Come with me, Alex. Let's get you cleaned up before it sets." My mother hesitated, then sighed. "Oh, thank you, V. You're a lifesaver. Alex, go with her." My father was already pouring himself more wine, uninterested. I had a choice. I could run to my room, lock the door and hide. Or I could follow the woman who had just marked me. I looked at her, and she raised a single, perfectly arched eyebrow. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I followed her up the grand staircase, the sounds of the dinner party fading with every step. My wet trousers clung to my skin, cold and uncomfortable, but my blood was boiling hot. We reached the top of the landing. Instead of turning left toward the guest room where her bag was, she steered me right into the main guest bathroom, a windowless room of white marble and bright, unforgiving LED lights. She pushed me inside and closed the door. Click. She didn't just close it. She turned the heavy brass lock, sealing us in. The exhaust fan hummed softly, creating a cone of silence. The room was small, smelling of lavender soap and her perfume. She didn't reach for any stain remover. She leaned back against the locked door, crossing her arms, and looked me up and down. "You're a mess, Alex," she whispered, her voice husky. "Take them off." I froze. "What?" "Veronica, your parents are downstairs eating roast chicken," she interrupted, stepping closer, invading my personal space. She reached out and touched the wet fabric at my waist. "And you are soaking wet. Do you want the stain to be permanent?" She wasn't talking about the pants anymore. The symbol of the wine, a mess to be cleaned, had shifted. It was now an excuse, a ticket to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. My hand shook as I reached for my belt buckle. I was terrified, but the adrenaline was intoxicating. I unbuckled the belt. I unzipped the fly. I let the ruined trousers fall to the marble floor, stepping out of them, standing there in my boxers and dress shirt, vulnerable and exposed. She didn't look away. She looked at my legs, then up to my eyes, a look of hunger that made my knees weak. "Good boy," she murmured. Suddenly, heavy footsteps creaked on the stairs. My heart stopped. It was my mother. The footsteps came closer, hurrying down the hallway. They stopped right outside the bathroom door. The doorknob jiggled. "Veronica?" My mother's voice called out, muffled by the wood but terrifyingly close. "I found some club soda in the pantry. It works better than chemicals." I looked at Veronica, panic seizing my throat. I was half naked in a locked bathroom with my mother's best friend. If she opened that door, my life was over. Veronica didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on mine, her hand moving slowly to rest flat on my chest, right over my pounding heart. She leaned in close, her lips brushing my ear, and shouted cheerfully through the door. "We're fine, Karen. I've got it under control. Don't come in, he's not decent." She smiled at me, a wicked, conspiratorial smile, and then her hand slid down from my chest to the waistband of my boxers. "She's gone," she whispered, her fingers slipping under the elastic. "Now, where were we?" The sound of the water rushing from the brass faucet was a deafening roar in the small, marble-tiled bathroom, a sonic shield meant to hide the ragged sound of my own breathing. Veronica didn't step back after my mother left. She stepped closer, effectively trapping me between the cold porcelain of the sink and the heat of her body. She reached for a plush white face cloth, running it under the icy stream, her movements slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic. She wasn't rushing to clean the wine stain. She was savoring the cage she had built for us. "You're trembling, Alex," she noted, her voice dropping to a register I had never heard her use before, smoky, authoritative, and stripped of all the familial warmth I was used to. She wrung out the cloth, the muscles in her forearms flexing, and then, without breaking eye contact, she dropped to her knees in front of me. It was a movement so sudden and so submissive, yet paradoxically dominating, that the air left my lungs. She wasn't kneeling to serve. She was kneeling to inspect. The cold, wet cloth touched my skin right where the wine had soaked through to my thigh, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my spine that nearly buckled my knees. This wasn't about hygiene. This was acclaiming. She dragged the cold terry cloth slowly up the inside of my leg, erasing the sticky residue of the Cabernet, but leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "I remember when you were born," she whispered, her eyes dark and dilated, looking up at me through her lashes. "I held you in the hospital. I watched you grow up." Her hand moved higher, the cloth grazing the hem of my boxers, dangerously close to the center of the heat that was radiating off me. "But you're not a child anymore, are you? You haven't been innocent for a long time." The barrier of Aunt V, my mother's best friend, the woman who bought me Christmas presents and sat at our Thanksgiving table, was being systematically dismantled with every inch of skin she touched. The risk was suffocating. My parents were just down the hall. If my father walked up to use the restroom, if my mother decided the club soda couldn't wait, They would find me half naked and their oldest friend on her knees. It would destroy everything. The marriage, the friendship, my life. And yet, I didn't step back. I looked down at her, at the curve of her neck, the dark lipstick on her lips, and I made a choice. I reached out, my hand shaking violently, and tangled my fingers in her hair. She leaned into my touch, letting out a soft, shuddering breath that vibrated against my stomach. She dropped the washcloth. It hit the floor with a wet plait, a discarded symbol of the lie we were telling. She didn't need it anymore. She placed her warm, manicured hands directly onto my bare thighs, her thumbs pressing into the muscle, anchoring me. She leaned forward, her face inches from me, her breath hot against my skin. "Do you know how long I've wanted to see if you grew up to be like your father?" she murmured, her voice dripping with venom and desire. "He's weak. Predictable." She brushed her lips against my skin, a ghost of a kiss that promised ruin. "Show me you're not like him, Alex. Show me you can take what you want." I was about to answer, about to pull her up and crush my mouth to hers, consequences be damned, when a sound from the countertop shattered the world. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Veronica's clutch purse, sitting on the marble vanity, began to vibrate violently. The screen of her phone lit up, the bright white light reflecting in the mirror. The name flashing on the screen was a bucket of ice water. "Karen calling." My mother was calling her. From downstairs. The vibration sounded like a jackhammer in the silence. Veronica froze, her lips inches from my skin. The spell broke instantly. She pulled back, her eyes wide, shifting from seductress to conspirator in a microsecond. "She knows," I whispered, panic seizing my throat. "She knows we're taking too long." Veronica stood up, smoothing her dress with frantic, jerky movements. She grabbed the phone and silenced it, but didn't answer. "She doesn't know," she hissed, her voice tight with adrenaline. "She's just controlling. She's checking in. But we can't ignore it." She looked at me, standing there in my underwear, flushed and terrified. The intimacy evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the danger we were in. She grabbed a dry towel and threw it at me. "Dry off. Put on your jeans. Hide the wet pants in the hamper under the towels." She was barking orders now, the general of this illicit operation. She moved to the door, checking the lock, then turned back to me. The look in her eyes had changed. It wasn't just lust anymore, it was a pact. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key card, a plastic hotel key from her keychain. She didn't explain it. She just slid it across the marble counter toward me. "My car is in the driveway," she whispered, her hand resting on the doorknob. "The spare key is under the mat. Get my bag from the trunk. Bring it to the guest room." She unlocked the door, but didn't open it yet. She leaned in, her lips grazing my ear, her voice barely a breath. "And Alex? Don't go to sleep. My door will be unlocked at midnight. Everyone else will be dreaming, but you and I, we have unfinished business." She threw the door open and stepped out into the hallway, shouting cheerfully, "All clean, Karen. Coming down," leaving me alone in the cooling air, clutching a towel and a terrifying promise. The glowing red numbers of the digital alarm clock on my nightstand read 12:15 a.m., bleeding into the suffocating darkness of my childhood bedroom like a countdown to a detonation. The house was silent, a sleeping beast of timber and drywall that had housed my innocence for 2 decades, but tonight, the silence felt heavy, charged with the static of the secret I was keeping. My phone vibrated against the wood of the nightstand, a single, short buzz that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. The screen lit up, illuminating the trophies on my shelf and the posters I hadn't taken down since high school, casting long, distorted shadows. It was a message from Veronica. 2 words. "I'm cold." It was a command disguised as a complaint, a summons that pulled at my gut with a physical force. I stared at the door. Outside, down the long, carpeted hallway, my parents were sleeping in the master suite. Every floorboard between my room and the guest room where Veronica waited was a potential alarm. I was risking everything, my relationship with my family, my home, my dignity, for a woman who had taught me how to tie my shoes. I threw off the covers, the cool air hitting my skin, and stood up. I didn't put on a robe. I needed to feel the cold to remind myself that this was real, that I wasn't dreaming. I opened my door, the hinges protesting with a low whine that made me freeze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stepped into the hallway, navigating the darkness by memory. The air smelled of lemon polish and the faint, lingering scent of the roast chicken from dinner, the smell of home. But as I crept past the family photos lining the wall, I felt like an intruder, a thief in my own life. I reached the halfway point, right outside my parents' door. I could hear the rhythmic, low rumble of my father's snoring. It was a comforting sound usually, but now it was a timer. As long as he snored, I was safe. Then, the snoring stopped. I froze, one foot hovering over the carpet, my breath trapped in my throat. The silence from the master bedroom was absolute. Then came the sound of rustling sheets, a heavy sigh, and the distinct click of a bedside lamp being switched on. A thin line of yellow light appeared under their door, slicing across my bare feet. My father was awake. He was getting up, probably for water or the bathroom. If he opened that door in the next 5 seconds, he would see me standing in the hallway in my boxers, heading toward the guest room. I didn't think. I lunged forward, abandoning stealth for speed, diving toward the shadow of Veronica's door at the end of the hall. I grabbed the cold brass handle, turned it, and slipped inside, closing it just as the master bedroom door groaned open behind me. The guest room was a different world. Heavy blackout curtains suffocated the moonlight, plunging the room into an inky abyss, but the air was thick with the scent of her expensive perfume and the heat of a body waiting. I engaged the lock, a quiet snick of metal that sealed my fate, and leaned against the door, my legs trembling. "You're late," a voice whispered from the darkness, smooth and amused. I couldn't see her, but I could hear the rustle of silk sheets. I walked toward the bed, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. Veronica was a silhouette against the pillows, the duvet pulled down to her waist. She reached out, her hand finding my wrist in the dark, her fingers cool and demanding. She pulled me down. I collapsed onto the mattress, the softness swallowing me, and she was on me instantly. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. Her hands were everywhere, in my hair, on my back, tracing the line of my spine. The risk of the hallway had stripped away my hesitation. I kissed her, desperate and hard, tasting the wine from dinner and the danger of the moment. It wasn't the tentative fumbling of someone my age. It was a collision. She rolled us over, pinning me to the mattress, her weight pressing me down, grounding me in the reality of what we were doing. "Veronica!" I gasped, pulling back slightly to look at her face in the shadows. "My dad! He's up! He's in the hall!" She paused, her hand resting on my chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of my heart. She didn't look scared. She looked at me with a terrifying intensity, her thumb tracing my lower lip. "Let him walk," she whispered, her voice fierce. "He thinks you're a boy, Alex. He thinks you're sleeping in your little bed with your trophies." She leaned down, her lips brushing against my neck, sending shivers violently through my body. "But I don't see a boy. I see a man who knows what he wants." It was a confession that shattered the last remnant of Aunt V. She wasn't seducing me for fun. She was doing it because she saw me, really saw me, in a way my family never did. The lock on the door, which I had turned to keep my father out, suddenly changed meaning. It wasn't protecting me from him. It was locking me in with her. I wasn't a victim here. I was a willing participant. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her down, surrendering to the heat. Then, the doorknob rattled. We froze, our bodies tangled, our breath hitched. It wasn't a knock. It was a slow, deliberate turn of the handle. The lock held. Clunk clunk. "Veronica?" It was my father's voice. He was standing right outside the door. He sounded groggy, confused. "Are you awake? I thought I heard voices." I stopped breathing. If I made a sound, if the bed creaked, if I even exhaled too loudly, he would know. Veronica's hand clamped over my mouth, her grip tight. We lay there, paralyzed in the dark, while my father stood inches away on the other side of the wood. He tried the handle again, harder this time. "Why is the door locked?" he muttered to himself. Then, from the bedside table next to my head, a sound erupted that made my blood run cold. Beep 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 beep. It was an alarm on Veronica's phone. A reminder she had set for her medication. It screamed in the silence, a digital siren announcing to my father that someone was definitely awake in this room. The digital shriek of the alarm was silenced only after Veronica's frantic fingers fumbled across the screen, swiping it off with a violence that knocked a glass of water onto the carpet. Silence returned, but it was brittle and terrifying. Outside the door, my father was still waiting. "Veronica?" he asked again, his voice laced with a confusion that was rapidly hardening into suspicion. "Is everything all right in there?" I was pressed flat against the mattress, pulling the duvet up to my chin, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he could hear it through the wood. Veronica took a deep, steadying breath. She didn't look at me. She looked at the door, her face transforming into a mask of weary apology. "I'm so sorry, Robert," she called out, her voice pitching perfectly into the tone of a groggy, embarrassed guest. "It's my new medication. The alarm was set for PM instead of AM. I'm such an idiot. Go back to sleep." There was a pause, an agonizing 5 seconds where the universe seemed to hold its breath. I stared at the door handle, praying the lock would hold if he decided to check on her. Finally, the floorboards creaked. "All right," my father grunted. "Good night, V." We listened as his heavy footsteps retreated down the hall, followed by the distant click of the master bedroom door. Only then did I exhale, the air leaving my lungs in a shuddering gasp. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time, but I stopped. If it rang, if it buzzed, if the light flashed, it was too dangerous. I powered it down completely, tossing it into my pile of clothes. I was cutting off my lifeline. I was choosing to be invisible to the world so I could be visible only to her. The adrenaline crash left us both trembling in the dark. Veronica slumped back against the pillows, turning to face me. The bravado of the seductress was gone, stripped away by the close call. In the shadows, she looked younger, and infinitely more sad. "My ex-husband used to sleep in the guest room," she whispered, the confession coming out of nowhere. "For the last 2 years of our marriage, he wouldn't touch me. He wouldn't argue with me. He just existed near me." She reached out, tracing the line of my jaw with a cold hand. "I felt like a ghost in my own house, Alex. Like I was fading away." She looked at me with a raw, painful honesty that made my chest ache. "Tonight, when you looked at me at dinner, when you followed me up here, it was the first time in years I felt solid again." This wasn't just a game to her. It was a desperate grasp for vitality. She wasn't the predator I had imagined. She was a woman starving for connection, and I was the only one who had offered it. "I'm not a ghost with you," I whispered back, pulling her closer. "You're the most real thing in this house." We didn't sleep. We lay tangled together in the dark, vigilant and exhausted, prisoners of our own desire, listening to the house settle, waiting for the inevitable sunrise that would bring a new, sharper danger. Dawn broke with a cruel, gray light that filtered through the edges of the blackout curtains. The digital clock read 6:45 a.m. I was scrambling to get dressed, hopping on one leg to pull on my jeans, when the doorknob turned. No knock. Just the click of the lock disengaging. Veronica had unlocked it earlier to avoid suspicion. "Veronica! Are you up? I made coffee." It was my mother. Her voice was cheerful, loud, and terrifyingly close. She was already pushing the door open. There was no time to get under the bed. No time to get to the window. Veronica's eyes went wide. She pointed frantically to the built-in wardrobe in the corner. "In!" she mouthed. I dove into the closet, pulling the louvered door shut just as my mother walked into the room. I was jammed between Veronica's long evening gowns and her winter coats, the cedar smell of the closet mixing with the scent of my own fear. Through the slats of the door, I could see a sliver of the room. My mother was sitting on the edge of the bed, handing Veronica a mug. I was inches away from them. If I sneezed, if my stomach growled, if I shifted my weight and a hanger clicked, it was over. "You look tired, V," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Robert said he heard you up last night. He thinks you're having a breakdown over the divorce." I flinched. My father was suspicious. "He's worried you're acting erratic," my mother continued. "He said you were looking at Alex strangely at dinner." My blood froze. They had seen it. Or at least, they had sensed it. I squeezed my eyes shut, the guilt washing over me. I was listening to my mother worry about her best friend, while I was hiding naked from the waist up in that friend's closet. Veronica took a sip of coffee, her voice steady as a rock. "Robert worries too much," she lied smoothly. "I'm just adjusting to the single life, Karen. It's messy. My mother sighed, standing up. Well, take your time. Oh, actually, before I go down to start eggs, do you have that blue cardigan you borrowed last month? The cashmere one? It's chilly this morning. She turned. She was walking straight toward the closet. Straight toward me. I held my breath, pressing myself back against the wall, my skin catching on the rough plaster. Through the slats, I saw my mother's hand reaching for the handle of the closet door. She was 2 feet away. 1 foot. I prepared myself for the scream, for the look of horror on her face. Karen, wait! Veronica shouted, spilling a little coffee on the duvet. My mother stopped, her hand hovering over the knob. She turned around. What? It's not in there, Veronica said quickly. It's in my suitcase. Under the bed. I haven't unpacked it yet. My mother paused, looking from the closet to the suitcase. Oh, all right. I'll get it later then. She smiled, oblivious to the fact that she had been seconds away from destroying her family. Breakfast in 10 minutes? Alex is probably still sleeping, lazy boy. I'll go wake him up. Let him sleep, Veronica said, her eyes flashing toward the closet. I'll wake him up on my way down. My mother left, closing the door. I burst out of the closet, gasping for air like a drowning man. Veronica was already out of bed, pulling on a silk robe. She looked at me, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a reckless fire. We had survived. And the fact that we had survived made the bond between us unbreakable. She walked over to me, fixing the collar of my shirt, her hands lingering on my chest. Go to your room, she commanded softly. Mess up your bed so it looks like you slept in it. Then come down to the kitchen. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand, a note she must have written while I was hiding. And Alex? Don't look at me at the table. If you look at me, I'll know what you're thinking about. And so will they. I unfolded the note Veronica had pressed into my hand under the table, shielding it from my parents' view with my napkin. The paper was warm from her skin, and the handwriting was sharp, angular, and unapologetic. It wasn't a love letter. It was an address, a penthouse in the city, an hour away, and a time, Friday, 8 p.m. Don't be late. I crushed the paper in my fist, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, just as my father lowered his newspaper. The kitchen was flooded with aggressive morning sunlight that bounced off the stainless steel appliances, making me squint. It felt like an interrogation room disguised as a suburban breakfast nook. My father looked at me, his eyes narrowed behind his reading glasses, searching for a crack in my armor. You're pale, Alex, he commented, his voice lacking its usual warmth. And you were up late. I heard doors opening and closing all night. Are you in some kind of trouble you're not telling us about? The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. My mother froze with the coffee pot in midair, looking between us. This was it. The moment of exposure. If I stuttered, if I looked at Veronica, it was over. I forced myself to take a bite of toast, the dry bread scraping my throat like sandpaper, and looked my father dead in the eye. I was sick, Dad. I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. Must have been the shellfish from the appetizers. I spent half the night in the bathroom. It was a gamble, a mundane, gross detail to kill the suspicion. My father stared at me for a second longer, then grunted, snapping his newspaper back up. Weak stomach, he muttered. You need to toughen up. Beside me, Veronica took a sip of her black coffee. She didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch in a barely perceptible smile. We had passed the test. My mother exhaled, relieved that the tension had dissipated, and turned to her best friend. V, surely you can stay for the weekend? It's been so short. Veronica set her cup down with a definitive clink. I can't, Karen. Work is piling up. And honestly, she paused, her eyes finally flicking to mine, dark and amused. I think I've overstayed my welcome. I don't want to be a bad influence on the boy. The double meaning hit me like a physical blow, but to my parents, it was just banter. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. The goodbye in the driveway was a masterclass in deception. My parents stood on the porch, waving like a quintessential happy couple, while I helped Veronica load her bags into the trunk of her sleek, black sedan. The air was crisp, smelling of wet asphalt and impending rain. As I slammed the trunk shut, We were momentarily blocked from my parents' line of sight by the popped lid. Veronica turned to me. The playfulness was gone. She looked fierce, almost predatory. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something metallic, my watch. The leather strap was still warm. I hadn't even realized I'd lost it in her bed the night before. If the maid had found it, if my mother had found it, I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. "You're careless, Alex," she whispered, grabbing my hand and pressing the watch into my palm, her fingers lingering on my pulse. "You left evidence." She leaned in close, dangerously close, under the guise of a friendly hug. "Next time, you leave nothing behind but your inhibitions." She pulled away before I could respond, her face instantly composing itself into a polite smile as she walked around the car to wave at my mother. I stood in the driveway, clutching the watch until the metal cut into my skin, watching her taillights disappear around the bend. I wasn't just watching a guest leave. I was watching my old life drive away. 3 weeks later, the elevator doors of the ecstatic glass high-rise slid open with a soft chime, revealing a hallway that smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. I wasn't wearing my old college hoodie anymore. I was wearing a new suit, one she had picked out, and the watch she had returned to me. I walked to the heavy oak door at the end of the hall, number 42B. My hand didn't shake this time. The boy who had spilled wine at the dinner table was gone, left behind in that suburban house. I reached into my pocket, but I didn't pull out a phone to call her. I pulled out a key, the silver key she had mailed to me inside a birthday card that simply read "for the right fit." I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy thunk. I pushed the door open. The apartment was dimly lit, the city skyline glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows like a backdrop of diamonds. Veronica was standing by the kitchen island, pouring 2 glasses of wine. The same dark, rich Cabernet from that night. She heard the door close and turned around. She wasn't wearing the Aunt V mask anymore. She was wearing a silk robe that hung loosely off her shoulders, and her expression was one of expectant ownership. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how my drive was. She simply held out one of the glasses toward me, her eyes locking onto mine across the expanse of the room. "You're on time," she noted, a purr of approval in her voice. I walked toward her, the sound of my dress shoes sharp against the hardwood floor, closing the distance between my past and my future. I took the glass from her hand, our fingers brushing, an electric spark that was no longer a secret to be hidden, but a fire to be stoked. I took a sip, the taste of the wine heavy and familiar on my tongue. "I told you," I said, my voice low and steady in the quiet apartment. "I'm not a kid anymore." She smiled, and then she reached out, her hand moving to the lapel of my jacket, pulling me forward until there was no air left between us. "Prove it," she whispered. I set the wine glass down on the counter, next to hers, and kicked the door shut behind me with my heel.